to me, much of the language we hear, I mean, Grover obviously given a very brilliant dissection of how the movement and how Republican politics work. I am more interested, as Jacob said, in the ideology and the ideas, and the place where politics and culture intersect. That is not just the politics of who wins the election, but the politics of, more like the psychopathology of everyday life, how we interact with one another, and the things we read and the things we write. To me, then, much of what we hear about the opposition to big government and the opposition to Obama in this poll, which was something like 90% of the respondents, those same 90% who say that race has nothing to do with it, to me that's what the literary critics call metonymy. It's when you substitute one idea for another. So when you say you don't really like all this government spending, you mean you don't want it being spent on those other people over there. Because your life no longer has a component, a directly remembered component of a time when there was no massive government spending like this. If you look at the third volume of Arthur Schlesinger's book on the New Deal in the Roosevelt years of upheaval, he has an interesting passage where he talks about the movement that actually led to the creation of Social Security. Remember, this is Townsend. It's this aged doctor in California who came up with what he thought was a brilliant, but some others thought a harebrained solution to how to take care of all the poor people. So once you create a system of pensions, anybody 65 and over is outside the system. Give all the jobs to the younger people, but just make sure you give some money to the older ones. And it was the funny money scheme. Well, it essentially became Social Security. But what Schlesinger says in his introduction to those pages is, in 1930 there had been a demographic shift. There were now twice as many people age 60 as there had been since 1900. And it said the people who found themselves lost and dislocated and alienated in 1931, 1932, were people, Schlesinger says, who could remember a time of America, the rugged frontier nation, rugged individualism, where there were new worlds to conquer, you went off and you did it on your own. If you're 65 or 70 now, you don't remember that time, because it hasn't existed in our lifetime. The interpenetration of the social life, the communal life, and the government life is now so thick that there isn't anyone who operates outside of it. So what becomes a memory is something different. It's nostalgia. It's nostalgia for the time that never was. And to me, that's much of the sentiment of the conservative revolt is about now. The problem with sentiment is it doesn't translate into useful governance. And that's why in my little book that Jacob was discussing, I write a lot about people like Burke and Disraeli, because they tried to solve the problem of conservative governance, as in fact Richard Nixon did. The senator is named for. Nixon saw it probably in the most far-sighted way of any modern politician. He didn't succeed. He might have succeeded. There were other difficulties with Nixon. But he saw in a very acute way that the ideas of the American idea of independence and the requirements of governance would somehow have to be combined. I think we're still actually struggling with that. I think Obama did. I think he's really solved it.
If I can just throw in a footnote here.
Yeah, and then we'll open it up for questions.
I'm just going to throw in a footnote, which is in listening to Sam and Grover, one of the things that always baffles or frustrates people about the neocons is how such a small number of people can have an influence on politics. And I think what Sam is driving at, and what Irving Kristol said in a quote, I don't have it quite exactly, but he said something along the lines of that ideas precede and reshape reality, which is that
Buckley said that too.
Did he? Yeah. The ideas are really the motor. And what that means is that conservatism has benefited from being the generator of ideas at a time when liberalism has essentially ran out of gas in the 70s. And the electoral success of conservatives, or the potential electoral success, I still think you need to be for something rather than just against. And the against will help for a short time, but I don't see what conservatives, what the ideas are, what the actual positive aspirations are at this moment.
Thank you. You want to do
Yeah,
one
I do.
more thing?
Liberty is something to be for, and their ideas, people talk about parties of ideas, they're good ideas and they're bad ideas. There's a lot of virtue against bad ideas. Scott Brown in my home state of Massachusetts crushed the Democrats by campaigning against a bad idea, the government taking over hospitals and health care. And so he won because he was against a bad idea, and his idea was not to do the stupid thing. The idea that somehow this is racial, which the left rolls out, is counterfactual and nonsense, and it's what liberals do when they're losing an argument. When a year ago, last January, when Obama was black, there was a 9-point advantage for the Democrats on who they were going to vote for Congress. After he wheeled, and instead of governing as he said he was going to, he did massive spending and massive government programs, none of which were written down and explained to the American people prior to the election. Today, the numbers are a 10-point advantage. You can vote Republican or Democrat. To go from D plus 9 to R plus 10, this is Rasmussen's likely voters, but you have similar numbers for all voters or registered voters from Gallup, is a huge switch. Nobody's changed colors. Nobody's changed their history or their longing for some past background. What happened was Obama and the Democrats did something very different from what they said they were going to do. Remember in the debates, Obama said he wouldn't spend, if he was lying, but he said, I'll never spend an additional dollar on a new program without cutting a dollar from an old program. He said that. That was part of the campaign. His most often stated promise was he wouldn't raise taxes on anyone who earned less than $250,000 a year. I mean, it took him 7 days to spend $800 billion on stimulus spending and 16 days to raise taxes on everybody who uses tobacco. And the only person who smokes cigarettes and earns more than $250,000 a year in the entire country is Barack Obama. So it just didn't take him any time at all to go boom, boom, I tax poor people and I just spend without restraint and there's no cutoff. So to look for some reason other than exactly what they did compared to what they said they did is what the other team does when they're losing an argument. We're used to it by now, and it just goes over people's backs like water off the duck. So it doesn't hurt anymore, but it does piss off the Tea Partiers to be called names by the administration, and just ensures they'll vote. So I just assume the D's keep it up.
That is about, at least half of that is totally false.
Which half?
First of all, I think we'll remember who appeared.
No questions for all of you.
At those early rallies, Grover. We know who went to Sarah Palin's book signings. These are people with T-shirts that had Osama bin Laden on one side and Barack Obama on the other. 9 out of 10 of these people said they personally disliked Barack Obama, right? Totally opposite from the rest of the country. They personally disliked him. What's there personally to dislike in such extreme numbers? These are people who said in the last few years the government has been too solicitous of the needs of African Americans. How? Exactly.
You're going from the entire country, which went from plus 9 to Obama, the Democrats, to plus 10 for the R's.
We're not talking about that.
That's not even personal with Obama.
We're not talking about the country at large. We're talking about this particular group. And this particular group has made pretty clear what its preferences are. And you know what? Preferences are a part of your politics, too.
You can call them names if you want.
No, who called them a name?
Smart politics.
Who called them a name? You said Obama called them a name, and I don't remember that he did.
All right, let me open up for questions, and then I'm sure we will get back to this. I saw Larry, you had